Emily Hale smoothed the soft fabric of her maternity dress as she entered the grand entrance of Le Chateau Steakhouse, her hand resting lightly on her growing belly. The soft hum of conversation mingled with the clinking of crystal glasses and the rich aroma of seared meat, butter, and aged wine enveloping her in a sense of luxury that she had always been taught to admire but never entirely feel comfortable in. Her husband, Richard Hale, walked several paces ahead of her, his tailored designer suit perfectly fitted, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with each arrogant step. Emily felt the familiar pang of discomfort. This was not her world. This was Richard's kingdom, where appearances ruled, and she was merely an accessory, expected to smile, nod, and comply. Richard scanned the room with a smug expression, his eyes lingering on several tables as if silently assessing whether they met his impossible standards. The restaurant staff, fully aware of his reputation and the generous tips he likely left, moved quickly and cautiously whenever he passed. He paused for dramatic effect near the bar, offering a charming yet calculated smile to a nearby hostess, a subtle show of power and dominance. Emily forced a small smile behind him, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment entirely, but from the simmering tension between them. She noticed the lavish chandeliers hanging above, casting soft golden light over the tables set with pristine white linens, fine china, and glimmering silverware. The subtle strains of a live pianist in the corner added a layer of sophistication that seemed almost cruel against the private storm building in her chest. Every moment in this space felt like a performance, and she was the unwilling star, trapped beneath the glare of her husband's expectations. Her mind, however, wasn't entirely focused on Richard. She knew someone was close, someone she could trust with her life. Her older brother, Jake, a former Marine sniper, was nearby, working undercover as one of the restaurant's servers. Emily had insisted he come along after Richard's subtle cruelty over the past months had escalated. Jake's presence was a quiet reassurance, a secret thread of protection that Emily clung to as she navigated this evening filled with unease. She couldn't help but glance at the other staff, wondering which one hid the sharp, vigilant eyes of her brother beneath their polite demeanor. A waiter approached with a polite bow, offering menus with a practiced smile. Emily's stomach tightened as she took it, acutely aware of every glance Richard threw her way, every smug remark he made to the staff or other patrons. She could feel the tension coiling in the air like a living thing, as if the elegant walls themselves were aware of the storm about to unfold. Emily tried to steady her breath, to anchor herself in the soft hum of the restaurant, but her anxiety was palpable. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and cautious hope, knowing that tonight might not just be another dinner, it could be the night everything changed. The rich scent of steak sizzling from the kitchen, the subtle hum of conversations, and the gentle flicker of candlelight created a scene that could have been a postcard of perfection. Yet Emily could feel the undercurrent of unease, like a dark shadow lurking beneath the elegance. She forced a polite smile at Richard as he gestured for the staff to lead them to a table at the center of the room, the perfect vantage point for his public display of dominance. Emily's fingers brushed her brother's hand as he discreetly moved behind the bar, invisible to Richard but always ready, and for the first time that evening, she allowed herself a small glimmer of confidence that she wasn't entirely alone. Emily's thoughts drifted back to her childhood, to the countless afternoons spent in the small, sunlit backyard of their family home, where Jake had always been her shadow, her protector, and her guide. Even as a boy, he carried a sense of seriousness that set him apart from other children, a quiet strength that Emily instinctively trusted. She remembered the scraped knees from climbing too high, the moments of fear during thunderstorms, and how Jake would always appear, steady and unwavering, offering reassurance with a calm voice and a protective arm around her shoulders. He had taught her to face challenges without hesitation, to meet fear with determination, and to trust in her own strength even when the world seemed uncertain. Jake's years in the Marines had only honed the protective instincts he had displayed since childhood. Emily remembered the day he left for training, the way he hugged her tightly and whispered a solemn promise. "No matter where I am, I'll always watch over you. If anyone ever tries to hurt you, I'll be there, somehow." Those words, spoken with the gravity of a man who had already seen too much of the world's danger, had stayed with her through every trial. Emily had carried that assurance like a talisman, feeling his vigilance even when thousands of miles separated them. Their bond had always been unspoken yet unbreakable, rooted in trust, love, and the shared understanding that Jake would go to any lengths to protect her. Emily knew that while most people relied on family in ordinary ways, she relied on Jake in extraordinary ways. Ways that could mean the difference between safety and harm, life and injury. His presence had always been her silent shield, his training and instincts ensuring that nothing could ever truly threaten her, as long as he was nearby. Now, seated at the polished table of the steakhouse, Emily could sense that protective shadow once again, closer than ever before. Her brother's quiet vigilance was hidden beneath the guise of a waiter's uniform, the casual efficiency of a restaurant employee, masking the deadly precision that Jake carried within him. She had requested his presence for tonight specifically, aware of Richard's escalating arrogance and cruelty. The thought that Jake was watching, calculating, and ready to act if necessary, gave Emily a flicker of courage. She wasn't alone. And in that knowledge, even amid the tension and fear that Richard exuded, Emily felt a strange comfort, an unshakable assurance that her brother's loyalty and skill would turn the tide should danger arrive. Richard Hale exuded an aura of entitlement that seemed to fill every corner of the steakhouse. From the moment he stepped in, heads turned, not merely because of his wealth but because of the palpable authority he carried like a second skin. His every movement was precise, deliberate, and commanding, leaving little doubt that he expected attention, respect, and immediate compliance. To Emily, sitting beside him, his arrogance was suffocating. Every glance he cast her way carried an unspoken critique, a reminder of her supposed shortcomings, her place in his meticulously controlled world. It was the subtle humiliations that cut the deepest, the half-smile of disapproval when she reached for a menu, the almost imperceptible sigh when she disagreed on wine choices, the quick, dismissive gestures that left her feeling both small and conspicuous. Richard's interactions with the staff were equally telling. A server would approach with polished efficiency, and he would question them with exaggerated scrutiny, his tone sharp yet practiced, as if testing their competence while simultaneously asserting his superiority. His wealth was on full display, whether it was through lavish tipping or casual remarks about his other properties, vacations, or vehicles. Guests nearby couldn't help but notice, some with admiration, others with mild annoyance, while Emily felt the weight of every gaze, acutely aware that her humiliation was as public as it was private. As the evening wore on, Richard's eyes wandered, settling briefly on a woman at a nearby table, a young socialite with a carefully poised demeanor and a knowing smile. Without subtlety, he leaned slightly, offering compliments with a tone meant to charm and assert, the casual flirtation a deliberate display of dominance. Emily's stomach tightened, her anxiety spiking as she realized that this was not mere harmless attention. It was a calculated reminder of her subordination, a public reinforcement of his control. She clenched her hands in her lap, fingers curling around the soft fabric of her dress, trying to steady the rising tide of frustration and fear. Her internal struggle was fierce. Emily wanted to speak, to confront his arrogance and reclaim her dignity, but years of manipulation and social conditioning had taught her caution. The restaurant, filled with elegantly dressed patrons and vigilant staff, was no place for a scene, or so Richard assumed. And yet, beneath the fear, a spark of defiance flickered within her. She longed to assert herself, to prove that she was more than a mere accessory in his life, that her worth could not be dictated by his whims. That tension, between fear and the yearning for dignity, settled over her like a storm cloud, heavy but pregnant with possibility, waiting for the moment when it would finally break. The tension between Emily and Richard had been simmering for weeks, but tonight it reached a boiling point. What began as a trivial disagreement over the choice of wine quickly escalated into a public spectacle. Richard's voice, calm at first, took on an edge sharper than anyone would have expected from a man of his wealth and social standing. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing, as he criticized Emily's suggestion with an exaggerated, almost theatrical disdain. The nearby guests, initially polite and absorbed in their own dinners, began to notice the exchange, their curiosity piqued by the tension radiating from the couple. Emily felt a flush of embarrassment and frustration. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend her choice and assert her opinion, but Richard cut her off with a sharp laugh, the sound cruel and dismissive. "Honestly, Emily," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, Sometimes I wonder how you even manage to pick a meal without causing a disaster." The words stung far beyond their surface meaning. The subtle humiliations of the past months, the constant undermining, the veiled criticisms, all of it had led to this moment. And then, in a flash of unthinkable violence, Richard raised his hand and struck her across the face. The slap echoed through the steakhouse like a gunshot, silencing the soft hum of conversation and the gentle clink of silverware. Glasses trembled on their tables, and even the pianist paused mid-note, sensing the gravity of what had just occurred. Emily's cheek burned, the shock radiating through her body as her hand flew to her face instinctively, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Her heart pounded violently, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and anger surging through her simultaneously. The guests around them stared, mouths agape, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't witnessed such an audacious display of cruelty. Some whispered, some gawked openly, but the social rules of the luxurious establishment kept most rooted in place, unable to act. Emily, however, felt a strange clarity amid the chaos. Fear surged, yes, but it was accompanied by a fierce, growing determination. She would not be humiliated further, not in public, not in private. This was the moment she realized that she could no longer remain silent, that action was necessary. Meanwhile, Jake, stationed nearby under the guise of a waiter, had seen everything. His sharp, trained eyes tracked Richard's every movement, noting the slight tension in his shoulders, the arrogance that had fueled his hand to strike Emily. Jake's fingers brushed a tray subtly, a minimal motion that allowed him to remain inconspicuous while his mind raced, calculating the fastest, safest, and most effective way to intervene if necessary. Every instinct he had honed over years of training screamed at him to act, to protect, but he waited for the precise moment, ensuring Emily's safety and preventing any rash escalation. Emily's gaze flicked briefly toward the nearby staff, sensing something familiar in the poised and attentive waiter moving with controlled efficiency. In that instant, hope and courage intertwined with her fear. She was not entirely alone. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the storm Richard had unleashed would soon meet a force he could neither anticipate nor contain. From the moment the altercation began, Jake's focus sharpened to a laser-like intensity. To anyone else, he was just another waiter, a polite young man moving with quiet efficiency between tables, balancing trays of food and glasses with practiced ease. But beneath the polished uniform and courteous smile lay a mind trained for precision, alertness, and calculated action. His eyes never left Richard for more than a fraction of a second, and even then, they darted back with the speed and accuracy of someone who had spent years scanning for threats in far more dangerous situations than a luxury steakhouse. Every slight shift of Richard's weight, every micro-expression, every subtle tightening of his jaw was noted and analyzed. Jake's military training had made him a master of patience and observation. He knew when to strike, and more importantly, when not to. He moved among the diners seamlessly, delivering bottles of wine, clearing plates, and offering polite nods. No one suspected the storm of deadly precision lying beneath the calm, professional exterior. The efficiency of his movements masked the tension coiling in his mind, the readiness to act at the slightest sign that Emily was in danger. To the casual observer, he was courteous, reliable, and unremarkable. But for Jake, every step, every gesture, every breath was a part of a silent calculation. His presence was not just to serve, it was to protect, to be ready, to anticipate every potential threat before it could reach her. Jake's mind raced, a careful balancing act between impatience and strategy. The urge to confront Richard immediately was almost overwhelming. He could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline that always accompanied a mission, the pull to act decisively and without hesitation. But he forced himself to remain calm, focusing instead on the safety of his sister and the precision of timing. A wrong move could escalate the situation, put Emily at greater risk, or alert Richard before the opportunity for justice presented itself. He counted seconds in his head, calculating trajectories, positioning, and contingencies. Every scenario played out mentally with meticulous detail, and yet he remained outwardly calm, the perfect waiter delivering wine with a practiced smile while silently preparing for what was to come. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric, as if the restaurant itself held its breath. Richard, arrogant and unthinking, had no idea of the force observing him so closely, a force that had sworn to protect and would not hesitate if Emily's safety were compromised. Jake's eyes flicked to his sister, catching the faintest hint of a glance in his direction. Emily's fear was evident, but there was also a spark. Trust, hope, and reliance on the one person she knew would never let harm come to her. That trust gave him focus, sharpening his resolve even further. As he moved to refill a nearby table's water glasses, he subtly positioned himself closer to Richard, the perfect vantage point from which to intervene. The storm was approaching, the moment for confrontation building, and Jake was ready. Patience and precision would define the outcome. Impulsive action was never part of the plan. Tonight, in this elegant steakhouse filled with oblivious diners, the calm exterior of a waiter concealed the lethal readiness of a Marine sniper prepared to protect his family at all costs. Richard's temper, far from spent, simmered as he settled back into his chair with a predatory glint in his eyes. The slap had not satisfied his need for dominance. Instead, it seemed to fuel him, pushing him to assert control over Emily more aggressively. With a smirk, he waved a nearby waiter over and demanded the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, his voice dripping with entitlement. "Make sure it's the Chateau de Luxe 1998, he said, emphasizing the words as if to remind everyone of the depth of his wealth. Then, with a flick of his hand, he ordered another round of appetizers, extravagant and unnecessary, all for the purpose of showing off in front of the other diners. Each gesture, each word, was calculated to humiliate Emily, to reinforce her position as someone subordinate in his meticulously controlled world. Some guests noticed the tension and shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances and whispered comments. A few leaned slightly closer to observe, curiosity piqued by the subtle drama unfolding at the center table. Others, entirely absorbed in their own meals, remained oblivious, creating a stark contrast between the world around them and the storm brewing just feet away. The murmurs, the stifled coughs, and the occasional clink of silverware all seemed to highlight Emily's discomfort, a public stage for private cruelty that made her cheeks burn with shame. But beneath the surface, Emily's inner strength was quietly awakening. Each of Richard's attempts to dominate, to control, and to humiliate, only sharpened her awareness of what she would and would not tolerate. Her eyes, previously downcast in fear, began to meet his with subtle defiance. Her hands, once tightly clasped in nervous restraint, now rested lightly on her lap, a small but powerful act of reclaiming control over her own body and presence. She felt the fire within her grow, fueled by the realization that she did not need to endure this treatment silently any longer. Meanwhile, Jake, ever vigilant, subtly adjusted his position, moving closer to Richard without drawing attention. Each step was precise, calculated, and masked by the motions of a waiter performing routine tasks. He observed Richard's every gesture, anticipating his next move, ensuring he was close enough to intervene at a moment's notice. The tension between the millionaire's arrogance and the sniper's quiet readiness created an invisible, electric line in the air. Emily remained unaware of the exact proximity, yet she could sense his presence like a shield, a hidden force ready to protect her when the moment finally demanded action. Richard, blissfully unaware of the storm quietly observing him, continued his display of arrogance with increasingly reckless abandon. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass and letting his gaze wander over the other diners with a self-satisfied smirk. His comments to Emily grew sharper, laced with subtle digs that spoke to months of accumulated resentment and control. "You really think you know how to choose wine?" he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Next time, maybe let someone with taste handle it." The casual cruelty, so typical of his behavior, ignited a low-burning fury in Jake, his trained senses alerting him to every slight, every microaggression. Jake, still maintaining the guise of an attentive waiter, moved with calculated fluidity, subtly adjusting his position so he could observe Richard's posture and reactions without drawing suspicion. Every tilt of the millionaire's head, every casual flick of his fingers, every smug expression became a data point in Jake's meticulous mental calculations. He noted the tension in Richard's shoulders, the rhythm of his breathing, the way he unconsciously tested the reactions of those around him. To a casual observer, Jake appeared serene, even indifferent, but beneath that calm exterior, his mind raced through strategies, contingencies, and the exact moment when he would need to intervene. Meanwhile, Emily, seated across from Richard, felt a shift in the energy around her. She noticed the waiter who had been serving them with quiet efficiency, a man whose presence had seemed ordinary just moments ago. Now, however, there was something different in the way he moved, the subtle intensity in his eyes, the precise attention to Richard's actions. A ripple of understanding passed through her. She realized instinctively that the quiet observer had a deeper connection to her safety. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with cautious hope, as if she were sensing the presence of a protective shield she couldn't see in full. Richard, oblivious to the danger, continued to escalate his arrogance. He laughed loudly at his own jokes, leaned too close to Emily in a taunting manner, and gestured expansively to other diners as if displaying his control over the room itself. The recklessness of his behavior created a palpable tension, an invisible countdown ticking toward confrontation. Every action he took, however innocuous it seemed to the untrained eye, only tightened the threads of control Jake maintained in his mind. Jake's military instincts harmonized with his careful observation. He calculated distances, exit routes, and potential obstacles, all while maintaining the flawless appearance of a waiter performing routine duties. He was ready, poised to intervene instantly at the first sign of genuine threat. The suspense in the air was electric, blending strategy with anticipation, and Emily could feel it too, a subtle vibration of imminent action. It was a tense standoff, an invisible clash between arrogance and lethal preparedness, with the room unaware of the silent war unfolding just beneath its polished surface. The tension in the steakhouse reached a breaking point when Richard, emboldened by his own arrogance, leaned too close to Emily, his hand brushing hers in a possessive, mocking gesture. Something in that motion triggered the final, irrevocable decision in Jake's mind. He moved with the precision of a predator who had waited patiently for the perfect moment. In one fluid motion, he set down the tray he had been balancing, the soft clatter of glasses punctuating the charged silence of the room. Guests, oblivious to the underlying tension until now, glanced up with curiosity, sensing a shift in energy but not yet understanding the cause. Jake stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Richard with an intensity that could slice through steel. "That's enough," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority that froze everyone in place. The simplicity of the words belied the lethal power behind them. All eyes in the restaurant turned toward the scene, and in that instant, the polished veneer of the steakhouse faded into insignificance against the raw force of what was unfolding. Richard, taken aback, blinked in confusion. His arrogance faltered as he realized that this was no ordinary waiter. Jake stepped closer, removing the pretense of casual service with deliberate ease. "I'm Jake Hale," he continued, his calm tone slicing through the tension like a blade. "Marine sniper. Decorated. And you, sir, will not lay a hand on my sister again." The words reverberated in the room, commanding attention and respect, leaving Richard momentarily speechless. The other diners recoiled slightly, whispering in disbelief at the revelation of the waiter's true identity and purpose. For the first time that evening, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Richard, the billionaire accustomed to bending the world to his will, now faced a man who was trained, lethal, and unwaveringly protective. Every smirk, every attempt at dominance, faltered under Jake's watchful gaze. The millionaire's confidence wavered as he took a hesitant step back, his gestures slower, more calculated, betraying the shock of suddenly realizing the threat posed by someone he had underestimated entirely. Emily's eyes widened, a mixture of relief, awe, and gratitude flooding through her. She could finally feel the weight lifting from her chest, replaced by the safety and authority that her brother brought to the moment. Yet, despite the explosive potential for violence, Jake's demeanor remained impeccably controlled. Every inch of his body spoke readiness, every muscle coiled for action if necessary, yet his calm authority radiated assurance that the situation was under control. There was no need for rash movement, his presence alone dictated the terms now. The restaurant fell into a tense silence, guests frozen in a combination of fear, fascination, and disbelief. Richard, once the master of appearances, now found himself the subject of scrutiny, powerless against a man whose very presence demanded respect. The balance had shifted irrevocably, and the evening that began with humiliation and fear now stood poised on the edge of justice, protection, and inevitable reckoning. Emily felt a surge of clarity wash over her as Jake revealed himself. His presence a shield that allowed her to reclaim the power that Richard had tried to strip from her. She straightened in her chair, her shoulders back, her chin lifted, and for the first time in months, she felt the courage to speak aloud what had been festering in her heart. Her voice, steady but tinged with raw emotion, carried across the hushed restaurant. "Richard, I am done being silenced," she said, her words sharp yet controlled. "I am not your property. I am not here to be humiliated or controlled. You have no right to treat me this way." Her words rang in the air, drawing the attention of every diner. Emily's anger, fear, and disappointment were palpable, yet they were balanced by a newfound sense of dignity. She spoke of months of subtle cruelty, the moments when he belittled her publicly, and the times he treated her as less than human. The voice that had been quieted by fear now rang with authority and self-respect. The courage to confront him was born from necessity, yes, but also from the awareness that she would not allow her unborn child to grow up seeing weakness as submission. Guests watched, captivated by the scene unfolding before them. Some leaned forward in admiration, whispering to their companions about her bravery, clearly impressed by the dignity with which she faced such an arrogant and controlling man. Others were judgmental, shaking their heads as if she had overstepped, unable to understand the complex dynamics behind the confrontation. The varying reactions of the audience highlighted the extraordinary nature of her courage. It was not just personal, it was public, and it demanded acknowledgement, even from those who chose not to support her. Emily's pregnancy added weight to every word, every gesture. Each movement, each declaration of independence, carried stakes far beyond the immediate moment. She was not only standing up for herself but also for the life growing within her. The strength she displayed under pressure emphasized her resilience, her unwavering determination to protect both herself and her child from the toxic dominance of Richard. As she finished speaking, a quiet authority settled over the table, the balance of power irreversibly shifting. Emily's courage had not only reclaimed her dignity but also illuminated the moral clarity of the moment. She was no longer a victim of circumstance or arrogance. She was a woman fully aware of her worth, empowered by her voice, and reinforced by the unwavering support of the brother who had always watched over her. Richard sat frozen, the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on him like an unbearable heat. For the first time in years, his usual confidence failed him, replaced by a tight knot of unease and disbelief. The restaurant, once a stage for his dominance and carefully curated displays of wealth, had turned into a theater of judgment. Diners whispered, eyes darting between him, Emily, and the composed waiter-turned-protector who had just exposed his arrogance. Richard's carefully constructed image of power was crumbling in real time, and no amount of money, charm, or social status could shield him from the consequences of his actions tonight. His arrogance, which had always been his armor, now clashed violently with Jake's poised authority. Every subtle motion, every controlled word from Jake highlighted the inadequacy of Richard's bravado. The millionaire tried to regain composure, attempting a forced smile, a casual shrug, gestures that once signaled dominance, but each movement only served to expose his vulnerability. The weight of his misdeeds, the public slap, the months of subtle humiliation, the failed displays of control, pressed upon him with a clarity he could not ignore. Internally, Richard experienced a storm of conflicting emotions. He felt fear, a gnawing awareness that his actions could have consequences beyond social humiliation. He felt regret, an unfamiliar taste of accountability for the pain he had caused Emily. Yet he also felt frustration at his own impotence, the inability to manipulate or control the situation as he had always done. The realization of wrongdoing was both humbling and terrifying, leaving him trapped in the glaring spotlight of moral and social reckoning. He had underestimated not only Emily but the force that had always silently protected her. Meanwhile, Emily's presence radiated strength and clarity. She had reclaimed her voice, and with it, her life. The weight of Richard's arrogance no longer overshadowed her. Instead, it reinforced her understanding of what she deserved. She began making quiet, deliberate decisions, asserting control over her own destiny and refusing to be manipulated or belittled further. Each glance, each firm word, signaled a woman taking charge of her life, supported by her brother but empowered by her own courage and insight. By the time the waiter-turned-protector returned to his station, the balance had shifted irrevocably. Richard was a man humbled, publicly shamed, and forced to confront the consequences of his cruelty. Emily, in contrast, emerged stronger, more self-assured, and ready to navigate her future with the dignity and independence that had been denied to her for too long. With Jake at her side, Emily rose from the table, moving with a newfound grace and confidence that contrasted sharply with the tension that had dominated the evening moments before. The soft lighting of the steakhouse seemed almost to bend around her, highlighting her presence and the quiet authority she now radiated. Patrons looked on, some in awe, some whispering in disbelief, as the pregnant woman who had once seemed fragile now walked with dignity, shielded by the calm, lethal poise of her brother. Every step she took was a statement. She was no longer subject to humiliation, she was no longer defined by the arrogance of her husband, and she was fully capable of reclaiming control over her life. Richard, meanwhile, remained at the table, stunned and impotent. The public spectacle of his downfall weighed heavily on him, and he was forced to confront the reality of his actions both in the eyes of the diners and within himself. The shame was compounded by the knowledge that his attempts to manipulate or intimidate were utterly ineffective against the combined presence of Emily's courage and Jake's unwavering protection. Private contemplation would follow, along with the consequences he had ignored for far too long. His empire, wealth, and social influence could no longer shield him from the moral and emotional reckoning that had been thrust upon him in this elegant, glaringly exposed setting. As Emily and Jake reached the entrance, the bond between the siblings felt stronger than ever. The unspoken understanding, the years of trust and protection, and the shared history of resilience converged in this moment. Emily felt safe, empowered, and confident, while Jake experienced the quiet satisfaction of fulfilling the promise he had made long ago, to always protect his sister, no matter the circumstances. Their unity was a silent testament to loyalty, family, and the extraordinary lengths one will go to shield the people they love from harm. Stepping out into the cool night air, Emily inhaled deeply, the tension of the evening gradually releasing from her body. The events inside the restaurant marked a definitive turning point, signaling both an ending and a beginning. Richard's humiliation and the exposure of his cruelty had shifted the balance irrevocably, while Emily's independence and resolve opened the door to a future she would shape entirely on her own terms. For the first time in a long while, she felt unencumbered by fear or control, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life with strength, dignity, and the unbreakable support of her brother at her side. The evening at the steakhouse had begun with fear, tension, and the quiet oppression of control, and it ended with empowerment, justice, and a profound sense of moral clarity. Emily's journey was one of transformation. From a woman subjected to the arrogance and cruelty of her husband, she emerged as a figure of dignity and courage, reclaiming her voice and asserting her worth. Each step of the night, the subtle humiliation, the public slap, the mounting tension, served as both challenge and catalyst, forcing her to confront not only Richard's arrogance but also her own fear. Through it all, she discovered the strength that had always existed within her, a resilience amplified by the unwavering support of her brother, Jake. The story's emotional arc highlighted the power of family loyalty. Jake's presence was more than protection, it was a testament to the enduring bond between siblings, a silent promise fulfilled with precision, patience, and unwavering love. His readiness and skill ensured that Emily could face her ordeal with safety, yet the resolution rested not only in his intervention but in her willingness to reclaim control and stand boldly in her own right. The narrative underscored that true loyalty manifests through action, courage, and the readiness to confront injustice, no matter how intimidating the opponent. Justice, too, played a central role. Richard, a man accustomed to bending others to his will through wealth and status, was confronted with accountability in the most public of ways. His arrogance and cruelty were exposed, leaving him to grapple with both internal and external consequences. The power imbalance that had long dictated the couple's dynamic was reversed, offering a powerful lesson. No amount of wealth or influence can excuse abuse or shield one from the repercussions of harming others. The story's resolution delivered catharsis, satisfying both emotional and moral expectations by showing that wrongdoing, especially against the vulnerable, carries inevitable consequences. At the same time, the narrative celebrated the strength of women, particularly in the face of oppression. Emily's pregnancy elevated the stakes, emphasizing that courage and empowerment are not diminished by circumstance, but rather highlighted when resilience is most necessary. The conclusion also hinted at future possibilities, a continued path of independence for Emily, potential reconciliation, or even consequences for Richard that extend beyond the immediate confrontation. The night's events left a lingering sense of satisfaction, reinforcing the themes of accountability, familial protection, and personal empowerment, and ensuring that the story resonated long after the final word.